Hi there, it's Leslie Vernick. I'm a Christian counselor, author, relationship coach, and I've written 2 books on destructive relationships. And I hope you haven't been too busy to watch the previous 2 videos I sent you on the top 3 lies that keep most women stuck in misery and unable to change. If you haven't seen them yet, I highly encourage you to go back and watch them now, because each video has some crucial truths you need to learn that will help you get unstuck so that you can change. Now, in today's video, you're about to discover the most detrimental lie that will keep you stuck, afraid, insecure, as well as a magnet for attracting unhealthy and abusive people. For that reason, I want you to give yourself enough time to watch this entire video undistracted. So turn off your cell phone, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and give yourself about 40 minutes. Even take notes so that you can really listen. Because I believe that if you can heal from this one core lie, you will feel amazingly different inside. And that lie is, I'm not enough. I'm not enough. I'm not enough to be loved. I'm not enough to be cared for. I'm not enough to be valued or protected. And this lie is even deeper because you believe that there's something deeply, fundamentally wrong with you, that you're flawed and unworthy. The technical name for this lie is shame, the unhealthy kind, and it runs so deep it affects you at the very core of who you are. And when we're smack in the middle of a shame attack, my friend and colleague Catherine Chamberlain says this. She says we feel hopeless, helpless, and defective in the very core of our being. We feel completely unworthy, disgraced, diminished, and at times even destroyed. It's one of the absolute worst feelings a human being can have about herself, and it's extremely hard to shake off. I think as a child, that's what I felt when I was living in Chicago with my mom after her divorce. I felt unloved, but more important, I felt I was unlovable. There was nothing in me that made me feel lovable. My mother was distracted and angry most of the time, and I had no real friends, and my way of coping with my feelings of not being enough was to try harder to do more so that I would be enough. That was the first lie we talked about in video number 1. If only I could do more and help more and be there for people, make them need me in some way, no wonder I became a counselor, then maybe I would be enough. Then maybe people would want to be my friend. But the sad thing was that I could never relax in the friendship I had because I always worried. What would happen if I failed or I couldn't do something for them? What would happen if they saw the real me and I disappointed them? What would happen if at some point they didn't need me anymore? There was nothing about just me that they would want. What they wanted about me was what I could do for them. Do you see how this kind of thinking makes you a magnet for people who will use you up and rub your nose in your own internal lie that you're not lovable or worthy when they're done using you? Or if you don't perform, or if you don't measure up or please them? And so you keep trying harder and you knock yourself out to somehow earn a bit of their love or attention. You keep trying and overfunctioning again and again and again because to stop puts you back into this sense of I'm not worth being loved or valued for just who I am place. And that feeling is far more painful than exhaustion that you get from overfunctioning. And that's why we don't stop our overfunctioning and people-pleasing behavior, because we fear if we do, the thought and feeling of I'm not enough will begin to rear its ugly head again and fill us with utter despair. Now, most women I know and work with struggle in some way or another with this internal feeling of not being enough, at least some of the time. So let's look at where it comes from. First, God designed human beings to connect with other human beings. Right from the start of life, a baby naturally gazes into her mother's eyes, and she asks the question, who am I? Now, ideally, during these mother and child interactions, the baby begins to get a sense of herself as someone who is loved and protected and valued, someone who is provided for, enjoyed, and important. This is God's plan for babies, so they experience unconditional love from both a mother and a father, which is a foretaste of understanding and experiencing God's love for her. This helps her start her life off with a secure sense of herself, and she begins to feel in the very core of her tiny little being that she's enough to receive unconditional love and acceptance, even if she cries and keeps her parents up all night, even if she throws up on them, and even if she's cranky. Sadly, many babies do not get this kind of unconditional love and acceptance. Her parent or parents may be exhausted caring for other children. They may be working full-time or taking care of elderly parents. Maybe they're distracted with texting and emails, Facebook, or other internet interests, work. Her parents may be drug addicted, immature, having marital problems, depressed, or just checked out. And truth be told, even the best parents, they get tired, they blow it, and sometimes they act sinfully toward their child. And so no child escapes family life without a few nicks to their sense of self. In addition to the parent's role, our sense of self continues to be shaped as we interact with our siblings. When we start school, we make new friends. When we play sports and learn new skills and become more aware of the world around us. As we grow, we gaze into the eyes of other people, such as our teachers, our coaches, our friends, our boyfriends, our mentors, our husbands, bosses, and we ask them the question, who do you say that I am? For example, Sharon grew up in a loving home environment and she felt really confident and secure as a 10-year-old child. However, her father lost his job and her mom started working full-time to help support the family. And then she could no longer homeschool Sharon. And so when Sharon started the 6th grade at a public school, her peers were a group of mean girls who teased and made fun of Sharon throughout junior high. Now Sharon's mom was upset by this and she went to the principal to see how this could be remedied. But the girls continued to bully and ridicule and reject Sharon. They did it subtly, but it still began to affect her. Now, for any child, bullying is a horrible experience, but Sharon began to identify with what the girls were saying about her. She began to believe that she was ugly, fat, stupid, a loser, undesirable as a person, as a friend, as a female. These bullies affected not only how Sharon felt, but how she began to see herself. And this had a huge impact on Sharon's sense of herself, and she began her high school years feeling insecure and believing she was not enough to be valued. Now in high school, Sharon's physical education teacher noticed that Sharon was an exceptionally fast runner. So she suggested that Sharon try out for the track team and put a good word in for her with her track coach. Sharon made the team and she did excel. And by the end of her high school, Sharon had set the school record in the 50-yard dash. And she got an athletic scholarship to one of the top universities for track. Also during high school, Sharon made a few good friends. And she was asked to her senior prom by one of the most popular guys in school. So during high school, Sharon's sense of herself once again began to shift. Now I'm enough, she thought to herself. Now I feel more confident. Now I'm more competent and valuable. Later on, during her junior year of college, Sharon seriously injured her knee in an automobile accident, and she could no longer compete in her track. She lost her scholarship, and that nagging feeling that she was not enough returned. You see, whether you and I succeed or fail, we're popular or rejected, when we based our value and worth on external sources rather than what God says, our sense of ourself will shift like sand, leading to an unstable and anxious sense of who we are and whether or not we're enough. Now, if you find yourself in that place right now, please don't beat yourself up. The Bible warns us that that's going to happen. The Bible tells us that by nature, we automatically and unconsciously exchange God's truth for a lie. In addition, the Bible says that we naturally tend to worship the creation rather than our Creator. Now, what that means for you and for me is that we all listen to false voices and we build our identity on shaky foundations rather than what God says. And so whether you're married to the kind of person who thinks too highly of himself, or you're the kind of person who doesn't think enough of yourself, we all need healing in order to see ourselves truthfully, as God sees us. Now remember, God designated your parents to give you an initial sense of who you are. But ultimately, if we're to grow strong and secure in who we are, our Creator must have the final word because He's the only one who knows fully who you are and who you were made to become. He's the only one who will always tell you the truth, who will never change, and who loves you unconditionally all the time. But instead of looking to God to tell us who we are, as fallen human beings, we tend to seek external sources to tell us who we are. And those other voices in our world, when we do that, instead of feeling secure and loved, we become self-conscious and afraid. And so I've identified 6 common false voices that we allow to define our value and our worth. I've already alluded to some of these external sources in the previous 2 videos. As a Christian counselor and coach, I've worked with hundreds, if not thousands, of women over the 30 years of my practice to heal from this lie that we are not enough. But I also had to do the hard work myself, to not only see myself differently, but also to feel differently inside. And so the following are the 6 areas where women tend to seek their sense of worth and value. Now on the surface, it can be misleading because these areas don't look sinful or harmful. However, when we depend on them to define us, we will be deceived, confused, and anxious. Why? because they're shaky foundations in which to base our identity, our value, and our worth. And when we listen to these external voices, we're going to also forfeit the opportunity to grow into the woman that God has created us to become. The first two voices we listen to, I've already talked about in video 1, and they are popularity and performance. These two lies keep us trying harder to be enough and trying harder to do enough so that people will like us or we will feel worthy. So I'm not going to repeat what I shared in the first video here, but depending on other people to define who you are is a scary and unstable place to rest your self-worth. So I want to quickly talk about the other 4 things that we tend to do to feel worthy that are also false foundations and create more internal anxiety rather than freedom and stability. The first is having more stuff or possessions. I went into that a little bit in video number 2 when I talked about feeling like I don't have enough and I deserve more. For example, I know a woman who describes everything she owns in terms of the brand. She'll say things like, "Oh, I just bought a new BMW," or "I love those Kate Spade purses," or "I'm so happy I just got a new Rolex watch for my birthday." Now, I think what she's trying to say to herself and to others is, because I can own these things, that must make me worthy or special or valuable and attractive. Now, please don't misunderstand what I'm saying here if you own those things, because I enjoy owning nice things just as much as the next woman. But having them or not having them does not define me or you or change the way I feel about myself. I'm the same person in Target clothes as I am in Nike gear. And if I have nice things or I don't have nice things, it's not a statement about me, nor is it a statement about you. Now, if you're not sure whether or not you're stuck in this lie, ask yourself if you overspend on things you don't need just to feel better about yourself. Or do you have way more stuff than you use or need, but you have a hard time getting rid of it? If so, it might be a sign that you do use possessions as a status symbol to feel like you're enough. And the lack of possessions can produce a feeling that you're not enough. You tell yourself that you're not as good as the woman who has more, or that she can buy more. I remember a friend in our small group not inviting any one of us over to her home for dinner. Why not? Because she told herself that her house was not as nice or as big as the other couples in our small group. Now, we loved her. We didn't care about the size of her house, but she cared, and she allowed her small house to define her worth and allowed it to make her feel less than or not enough. Now, don't be deceived if you've embraced a minimalist lifestyle. Maybe you don't own a lot, nor do you want to, but you still may be swept up in allowing that decision to define you. By not having stuff, you tell yourself that you're doing it all right. You're better, you're more special, more godly, more spiritual than the woman who clings to her stuff. The Apostle Paul tells us that he learned to be content living with plenty and living with very little. Possessions are for us to enjoy, and they can also encumber us, but they are never meant to define us. Marketers would have you believe that you're worth more if you purchase what they pitch. Next time you're watching TV commercials, listen carefully, especially to the tagline, because in most advertising, the tagline goes something like this: "You deserve it, and you're worth it. You need more." Remember our second lie? They promise us worthiness if we buy what they sell. Don't fall for it. At best, it's a temporary fix, but soon you're off to the mall for the next thing you need to buy to feel like you're enough. Now, in addition to the performance, popularity, and possession voice, another external voice that people want to feel more worthy is having power. Now, don't get me wrong, everyone wants some power in life. At a minimum, we want the power to choose our own way, to decide what we say yes to and what we say no to. Even toddlers fight for that power when they shut their little mouths tight and they refuse to eat something they don't like. No matter how hard you try to get in, it's not going in. And as human beings, our power is limited, but everyone likes to feel competent and in control of themselves and their circumstances around them. That's why living in community and with other people is so challenging, because we often feel very powerless over other people's choices, as well as the circumstances we're in. No one likes to feel helpless and powerless. However, when having power defines you as powerful, then we're often tempted to misuse our power, whether it's political power, physical power, economic power, sexual power, or even spiritual power, to manipulate and sometimes bully others so that we can gain control over the situation to get what we want. Now, Jesus warns those of us who have power not to misuse that power to boost our self-esteem or even to serve our own selves. Being powerful, just like being popular, does not define you as a good person or more deserving or worthy than someone who does not have these things. Adolf Hitler, the German chancellor during World War II, was very powerful, and he actually was popular. But he used his power and popularity for evil purposes. Power, like popularity and possessions, often distract us from God and can corrupt our heart and our mind, because we get deceived into believing that our power and our popularity and performance and even our possessions come from our own strengths. And what happens is we start to believe the opposite lie, that we are enough in ourselves and we don't need God. We refuse to acknowledge that everything good in us is from God. And if He's given us a position of power, we should use it wisely and for His purposes. And also those who feel powerless, the weak, the helpless, the disenfranchised victims of the powerful, they often feel like God doesn't see or care about that plight. They believe the lie that they're not enough to be cherished and protected. But that's not true. Now, power and position often go together, such as if I'm the president of a company, or I'm the president of a country, or a leader of an organization, then that must mean I'm enough, I'm wise and competent. That might be true, but then again, it might not be. Your professional position is only one part of who you are. You still have weaknesses. You still have a dark side that's often hidden from your own awareness. And there are also sinful parts of yourself that are also parts of who you are. And these too must be acknowledged if you're to be a whole person and have a truthful sense of who you are. Now, some women feel inferior or not enough because they don't have a desired position. Maybe you're not a wife or a mother or a leader, and you allow that lack of having a particular position to tell you that there must be something fundamentally wrong with you. Hear me. God knows you desire these things. Your desires are good. But just like I desired popularity as a child and didn't get it, there are times we don't get everything we desire. It hurts. It's painful, but it's not a statement about who you are or who you're not. Never confuse your pain with your value or your identity. So we don't start to feel like we're enough from being more popular or performing enough or having more possessions or gaining more power or positions or status, nor is it from trying harder to be perfect, sinless, or flawless. You see, perfectionism comes from an internal voice that constantly tells you that if you're not perfect, then you can't possibly be loved. You can't possibly be enough. For example, everyone else can still be a sinner and still be loved, but not you. Everyone else can have weaknesses and be accepted, but not you. Everyone else can make a mistake and receive grace and forgiveness and mercy, but not you. Now, it doesn't matter if you have actual real people in your life who do love you and accept you. You don't receive it very well because all you can see is your flaws, your sins, your mistakes, and your failures, and you put yourself in a no-win position with this mindset. The only way you can feel good about being you is to achieve the impossible. You must be perfect. And when you fail, which of course you always will, the result is that toxic shame, self-hatred, and despair. Now, how do you know if you're caught in this lie? Listen to how you talk to yourself when you mess up. Does it sound something like this? I can't believe I said that. What is wrong with me? In other words, you're never allowed to say something stupid or sinful or make a mistake. Why not? Because you have to be perfect. Or maybe you say to yourself, I just can't forgive myself. I just can't believe I did such a horrible thing. Well, let me ask you a question. Why do you have such a hard time accepting that you are a finite, fallible human being? That you are a sinner and that you are capable of doing sinful things? It's because you expect yourself to be better than that. You expect yourself to be perfect. Friend, the answer to healing this internal sense of not being enough is never achieved by trying harder to be enough. It's not in gaining more popularity or being more productive, having more possessions, or securing more power, or having a coveted position, or even achieving perfection. A healthy sense of self doesn't happen at all by focusing on ourself. All those paths either lead to pride or more shame and fear because we fail to measure up. Now, if while listening to this you become aware of some sinful patterns in your life or some internal weaknesses that you need to work on, by all means, take it to heart. Work on it. But understand this important truth. You will never get to a place where you never have any weaknesses, flaws, or sins. And after all your hard work at self-improvement, by whose yardstick will you measure that you are finally enough, worthy enough, acceptable enough? Usually it'll be your own yardstick or some other fallible human being's yardstick. But that will never give you the stability and security that your heart craves, nor will you ever have a truthful and healthy sense of who you are. Friend, God has something much better for you. And so let's just take a minute and look at a woman who did not feel good about herself. She knew full well she was not enough, and she could never be enough. She had 5 failed marriages, and the man she was living with currently was not her husband. She was an unpopular woman. The women of her community, they actually shunned her. She was a woman who had no power, she had no position because of her gender, she had no marital status, and her race? She was a Samaritan, and the Jews of those days despised Samaritans. They saw them as inferior. And so let's see how a single encounter with Jesus changed the way this woman saw herself. Jesus met this woman at the community water well. She went there that day all alone to gather her daily supply of water. In the New Testament Middle Eastern culture, women went to the well with other women in the early morning before it got too hot. Being there all alone at noon tells me how utterly unloved and unpopular this woman was. Now, while she was at the well, she notices a Jewish man sitting next to the well, and he startles her by speaking to her and asking her for a drink of water. Now, this was highly irregular. Jewish people did not talk to Samaritans. They considered them garbage. Not only that, she was a Samaritan woman, and he was a Jewish man, another reason for him never to speak to her. So Jesus violated cultural practice by asking her for a drink of water and by engaging in a lengthy and rather stimulating conversation with her. During their talk, he even offered her a valuable gift, living water. Jesus engaged with this woman talking theology, talking about life and relationships, and even about God. And he revealed to this woman something he rarely shared publicly. He told her he was the Jewish Messiah. Never once did he focus on her flaws or failures, although he was well aware of them, because he saw beyond her gender. He saw beyond her race or her status or even her messed up life. He saw the woman who he created her to be. And as Jesus talked with her, the woman asked him questions, and Jesus took his time to answer them. In her conversation with Jesus, the woman began to see herself differently. She was no longer just an unloved, unimportant, immoral Samaritan woman. But she also began to see that she was a person in a stimulating conversation with someone who claimed to be the long-awaited Jewish Messiah. This amazing man knew everything bad about her, yet he didn't treat her with contempt or indifference, but with dignity and respect. And their conversation brought out sides of her that she had long forgotten. Her curiosity, her inquisitiveness, her theological questions, her hunger for the truth. The Samaritan woman came to the well that day knowing full well that she was not enough. She knew, deep down, she was a broken woman, an immoral woman, a damaged woman, a Samaritan woman, unwanted, unloved woman. But in that single encounter with Jesus, she began to see herself differently. She began to see herself as a beautiful woman, a valuable woman, and a forgiven woman. Her identity went beyond what she did or she didn't do, or even how she felt. Her identity went beyond what other people thought about her, or even what she thought about herself. Those things no longer defined who she was. She realized that she was more than her race, her gender, her education, her past. Now she knew in her heart of hearts that she was something more. She was set free from who she thought she was and set free from what other people told her she was. She was free to become the woman God made her to be. And the remarkable thing about this entire story is that the woman's very countenance was so transformed that when she ran back into her town shouting, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did," the remarkable thing about it was that people listened to her. The same people who regularly scorned and shunned and rejected her in the morning noticed something different about this woman in the late afternoon. And the Bible tells us that many people came to Christ because of the words of this woman. So what does that mean for you right here today? We've already seen that our identity is forged and formed in relationship. From infancy, we need that assurance that we are deeply loved and accepted in spite of our flaws, in spite of our weaknesses, in spite of our sins. We've already learned that this rock-solid assurance can never fully come from our family of origin or from our own strength striving to be enough. It won't come from having power or lots of possessions, or performing really well, or being popular, having a position, or being perfect, which are always too unstable to give us what our heart craves. It also can't come from other people who sometimes fail us and let us down. It can only come from the one who is perfect, the one who knows us perfectly and loves us ferociously and unconditionally. It can only come from God. Like the woman at the well, we too need a personal encounter with Jesus. Who does he say that you are? And this shift from looking to yourself or to others to define who we are is crucial to your healing. C.S. Lewis writes that the most fundamental thing is not how we think of God, but rather what God thinks of us. And how God thinks of us is not only more important, but infinitely more important. So let's just look at a few passages in the Bible that help us see how God thinks of us. In Psalm 8, he says, "When I look at the night sky and see the work of your fingers, the moon, the stars you set in place, what are mere mortals that you should think about them? Human beings that you should care for them. Yet you made them only a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You gave them charge over everything, and you put all things under their authority." In Ephesians 1, it says, "Even before he made the world, God loved us and chose us in Christ to be holy, without fault in his eyes. God decided in advance to adopt us into his own family by bringing us to himself through Jesus Christ. This is what he wanted to do, and it gave him great pleasure." Perhaps you've read these passages before, and nothing inside has changed. You still feel unworthy, unloved, not enough. You might be saying to yourself, "Oh, I've already tried looking at that. I've tried looking at what God says, Leslie. It doesn't work." Let me provide the missing piece. When you read what God says in the Bible, are they words on a page, or do you take them into your heart and believe them? You see, most of us don't need more informational truth about God or what he says, but what we do need is we need more transformational truth. And that only comes when we not only listen to what God says, but we see it as absolutely crucial to our well-being and believe it with our hearts. Let me give you an example. Imagine that someone sends you a registered letter today when you go open your mail, and you open it and it says something very strange. It says you've inherited $10 million from a recently deceased relative who you don't even remember having. The law firm on the envelope who sent the letter said that they would like you to contact them right away. Now stop for a minute. How would you feel? Well, it depends on whether or not you believed the letter to be genuine. If you didn't believe it, there would be no change in you and you'd just toss the letter in the trash. You'd laugh, you'd be upset. You certainly wouldn't feel like a millionaire, right? However, if you thought maybe it might be true and you called the law firm and you found out it was true, it would definitely change you. And you'd begin to feel differently, think differently, and live differently. You see, knowing the truth isn't the same as believing the truth. The Bible tells us that it's unbelief, not a lack of knowledge, that keeps us from experiencing the truth of what God says. In fact, Satan knows a lot of true things about God, but he doesn't believe. Learning the truth won't change us, but believing it absolutely does. Jesus knows that there will always be a struggle within us to trust and believe what God says over all the noise and lies in our own head. He also warned us about a powerful enemy at work who will accuse us and lie to us about our value and our worth. Jesus tells us that Satan is a liar who continually tries to deceive us and confuse us about what is true about God, about ourselves, and about how life really works. And if we're not mindful of his strategies, we will easily fall for his lies and listen to different voices. The Bible tells us in Isaiah 45, "I, the Lord, speak the truth. I declare what is right." Jesus tells us in John 10, "My sheep know my voice." Over 70 times in the Gospels, Jesus says, "I tell you the truth. I tell you the truth." Jesus doesn't want you just to believe in him. He wants you to believe him. The Apostle John knew the path to real change when he wrote this. He said, "So we have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love, and whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this is love perfected within us, so that we might have confidence for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love." You see, when we know and rest on God's unconditional love and acceptance for us, we're free to let go of our fear that we're not enough. His love for you and for me does not depend on whether or not we're enough. His love is a free gift, not something we can earn or that we even deserve. And it's a relief to me. If we can't earn it and don't deserve it, then we can never lose it, because God's love for us does not depend on us at all. You change the way you see yourself and feel about yourself when you believe and abide in the truth of what God says about you. And so I want you to start today to speak God's truth to yourself instead of the lies that you are not enough. God says you have value and worth. God says you are deeply and fully loved by Him. God says He desires to give you a clean slate by forgiving you and bringing you into a close relationship with Him. God says you belong to Him. He adopts you into His family. And God says your life has meaning and purpose. You are not an accident. Remember, the lies we believed so long often have very deep roots and are not removed all at once. God's word tells us that we change by renewing our mind. Therefore, it's critical that we practice speaking the truth to ourselves so that we don't forget who we really are. To heal from this utter sense of unworthiness, of not being enough, we look to Christ, not to the world, not to others, or even to ourselves to tell us who we are. All that is good in us is from God and for His glory. And when we rest in that place, we're not fearful and we're not proud. Rather, we're grateful and secure. We press on to know this amazing God who loves us so much that He empowers us through His Son Jesus to live a life beyond pleasing or fulfilling ourselves. And it's only from that place can you ever feel enough, secure in God's love for you. Friend, 3 core lies that mess with your mind, your soul, and your spirit. Number 1, I'm not doing enough. Number 2, I'm not getting enough. And number 3, I am fundamentally not enough. There is so much more I would love to share with you about healing these core lies, as well as others that we get stuck in. I want to help you become a strong, God-centered woman. And if you would like to know how to work with me in a small group environment, make sure you watch your mailbox tomorrow for all the details. Until then, God bless.